They made the obese girl sleep
Swollen and
outside.
ashamed.
In the rain, the
A
mountain man
pathetic
never let
display.
her cold again. The rain hammered against the wooden walls of the Thompson boarding house like an angry fist demanding entry. Inside, Clara Thompson, Clary to those few who bothered with kindness, pressed herself against the corner of the kitchen, her hands trembling as she scrubbed the last of the evening dishes. Through the doorway, she could hear the laughter of the other young women, sharp and cutting as broken glass. "Did you see how she ate tonight?" Margaret's voice carried clearly, meant to be heard. "Like a starved animal. No wonder she looks the way she does." More laughter erupted, and Clary's cheeks burned hot despite the cold dish water that chapped her hands. She had lived in this boarding house for 3 years, ever since her parents died of fever, leaving her with nothing but debts and the charity of Mrs. Henderson, who owned the establishment. Charity that came with a price, endless work, and the constant cruelty of the other residents. The autumn of 1789 had been particularly harsh in the Wyoming Territory. The small town of Pinecrest, huddled in a valley between towering mountains, isolated from the civilized world by weeks of difficult travel. Here, in this frontier settlement where survival demanded strength and conformity, difference was not tolerated. And Clary was different. She had always been larger than other girls, her body soft and round, where theirs were angular and slight. In a world where thinness often meant poverty and hunger, her size should have been a sign of health. Instead, it became a mark of shame, a target painted on her back for every insecure young woman who needed someone to feel superior to. "Mrs. Henderson!" Margaret called out, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Clary's taken forever with those dishes again. I think she's eating the scraps." Clary's hands stilled in the water. She hadn't been eating anything. She'd learned long ago to ignore the constant hunger that gnawed at her belly, knowing that any food she took beyond her meager portions would be noticed and mocked. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway, her thin face pinched with perpetual disapproval. "Is this true, Clara?" "No, ma'am. I was just finishing." "Always excuses with you." The older woman's eyes were cold. "The other girls have complained about your laziness, your slovenly habits. I've been patient, but my patience has limits." "I work harder than anyone here," Clary said quietly, finding a small spark of courage. "I'm up before dawn and I'm the last to bed. I do the washing, the cooking, the cleaning." "And you eat enough for 3," Margaret interjected, stepping into the kitchen with her followers flanking her like a pack of wolves. "Mrs. Henderson feeds you out of the goodness of her heart, and this is how you repay her? By complaining?" The trap closed around Clary with practiced precision. She had walked into it again, speaking up when silence would have served her better. Now Margaret's eyes gleamed with malicious triumph. "Perhaps," Margaret continued, turning to Mrs. Henderson, "Clara needs to learn some gratitude, some humility. After all, she's not paying her way like the rest of us. She's here on charity." Mrs. Henderson's expression hardened. "You're right, Margaret. I've been too soft." She turned to Clary. "You'll sleep outside tonight. Perhaps a night in the cold will teach you to appreciate the warmth and shelter I provide." Clary's heart plummeted. "But it's raining. It's been raining for days." "Then you should have thought about that before being ungrateful." Mrs. Henderson pointed to the back door. "Out, now. You can come back in at dawn, if you've learned your lesson." "Please," Clary whispered, hating the desperation in her voice. "I'll work harder. I'll do anything." "Out!" The other girls watched with varying expressions, some gleeful, others uncomfortable but silent. Not one spoke up for her. Not one ever did. Clary stumbled toward the door, her vision blurring with tears she refused to shed in front of them. She grabbed her thin shawl from its peg. Margaret deliberately knocked it to the muddy floor as she passed, and the others laughed and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit her like a physical blow. The rain was not the gentle spring variety, but the harsh, driving sheets that marked the transition into winter. Within seconds, her dress was soaked through, clinging to her body in a way that would have brought fresh mockery had anyone been watching. The temperature had dropped with nightfall, and she could see her breath in small puffs of white. There was a small overhang near the woodshed where she sometimes sought shelter during her outdoor chores. Clary made her way there, her shoes squelching in the mud, her shawl now soaked and heavy, providing no warmth at all. She huddled under the overhang, which kept off some of the rain but none of the cold, and wrapped her arms around herself. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. The cold seeped into her bones, making her joints ache and her muscles cramp. She tried to stay awake, fearing that sleep in these conditions might mean never waking, but exhaustion and despair pulled at her consciousness. Her teeth chattered so violently she bit her tongue, tasting blood. Why did they hate her so much? What had she ever done except exist? She thought of her parents, dead 3 years now, and wondered if they would recognize what their daughter had become. A thing to be mocked and tormented, barely human in the eyes of those around her. The tears came then, hot against her frozen cheeks, and she let them fall. No one was watching. No one cared. She didn't hear the footsteps approaching through the mud, didn't see the figure that emerged from the tree line at the edge of the property. She only became aware of a presence when a deep voice, rough with disuse, spoke from the darkness. "Who in God's name left you out here?" Clary's head snapped up. Through the rain and darkness, she could make out a tall figure, broad-shouldered and wrapped in furs. A man, she realized with a spike of fear. She tried to scramble backward, but her limbs were too cold, too clumsy. "Easy," the man said, moving closer. "I'm not going to hurt you." As he stepped under the overhang, Clary could see him better. He was perhaps 35, with dark hair pulled back from a weathered face and eyes that reflected concern rather than threat. He carried a rifle over one shoulder and a pack on his back. A hunter or trapper, she realized. "What happened?" he demanded. "Why are you out here?" Her voice wouldn't work properly through her shivering. "I deserved it." "Deserved it?" His expression darkened. "Nobody deserves this. You'll die of cold exposure before morning." He shrugged off his pack and rifle, then removed the heavy fur cloak he wore. "Here." He draped it around her shoulders, and the warmth trapped in the fur was like heaven. Clary clutched it gratefully, unable to form words of thanks. "Can you walk?" he asked. "I think so." "Good. Come with me. I've got a camp about a mile into the mountains. There's a fire and shelter." When she hesitated, fear and hope warring in her chest, he added gently, "I give you my word I mean you no harm. But if you stay here, you'll be dead by morning. That's not a threat. That's a fact." Something in his eyes, in the straightforward honesty of his words, made Clary believe him. She nodded and tried to stand, but her legs buckled. The man caught her before she fell, then, without ceremony, lifted her into his arms. "What's your name?" he asked as he began walking toward the mountains. see, Clara, Clary, I'm Elias, Eli." His strides were long and sure despite the darkness and the burden he carried. "I was hunting nearby when I heard voices earlier. Sounded like mockery. When I came closer to investigate, I saw them push you outside. You've been watching? I wanted to make sure you'd be all right. When the hours passed and you were still out here." He shook his head. "Those people should be ashamed." The simple declaration, spoken with such conviction, broke something loose in Clary's chest. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these were different. Tears of relief, of being seen as human by someone, anyone. Eli carried her through the forest with the confidence of one who knew every tree and stone. The rain fell harder, but the canopy of evergreens provided some shelter. After what felt like both an eternity and no time at all, they arrived at a natural cave set into the mountainside. Inside, a fire burned low but steady, and Eli had created a surprisingly comfortable living space with furs and blankets. He set Clary down near the fire and began building it up, adding wood until the flames leaped high and heat radiated through the cave. "Get out of those wet clothes," he said, turning his back to give her privacy. "There's a dry shirt in that pack there, and blankets to wrap yourself in. Your dress can dry by the fire." Clary's fingers fumbled with the buttons of her soaked dress, so cold she could barely feel them. She managed to strip down to her chemise, also wet, and pulled on Eli's shirt, which hung to her knees like a nightgown. She wrapped herself in the blankets he'd indicated, finally beginning to feel warmth return to her extremities in painful prickles. "All right," she said quietly. Eli turned back, satisfied that she was warming up. He hung her dress near the fire on a makeshift drying rack and began preparing something at the edge of the cave. Moments later, he handed her a cup of something hot. "Pine needle tea," he explained. "Not the best tasting, but it'll warm you from the inside." Clary sipped it gratefully, barely tasting the bitter flavor. The warmth spreading through her chest was worth any unpleasantness. As sensation returned to her body, so did her awareness of the situation. She was alone in a cave with a strange man, miles from town, wearing only his shirt. But as she watched him move about the space, tending the fire, checking her dress, preparing what looked like strips of dried meat for them to eat, she felt no fear. There was something inherently trustworthy about Eli, something solid and dependable. "Why did you help me?" she asked finally. He settled on the other side of the fire, studying her with those steady eyes. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because no one deserves to be treated the way you were." He paused. "And because I know what it's like to be cast out. You? 5 years ago, I was engaged to be married. The daughter of the wealthiest man in Pinecrest. Yes, I'm from your town originally. But when her father's business dealings were exposed as fraudulent, my family lost everything. Suddenly, the engagement was off, and I was persona non grata. The same people who'd welcomed me into their homes wouldn't meet my eyes on the street." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "I came up here to trap and hunt, figuring I'd spend a season in the mountains and then return. But I found something up here that the town never gave me. Peace, freedom, the chance to be judged on my own merits, not on my family's status or how much money I had." "So you stayed?" "I stayed. That was 4 years ago. I go into town once or twice a year for supplies, but otherwise, I live up here alone." He smiled slightly. "It's a good life. honest, clean. The mountains don't care what you look like or who your parents were. They only care if you're smart enough and strong enough to survive. Clary absorbed this, her hands wrapped around the warm cup. The women at the boarding house, they've always hated me because of how I look. They hate you because they're small-minded and cruel, Eli corrected firmly. That's about them, not you. But I'm not. She struggled to find words that wouldn't hurt to say. You're a human being who deserves basic dignity and respect, Eli interrupted. Anyone who can't see that is blind. The simple declaration stunned her into silence. In all her years of torment, no one had ever spoken up for her with such conviction. She looked at this mountain man across the fire, this stranger who had saved her life and was now offering her something even more precious, validation that she mattered. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. "Get some rest. In the morning, we'll figure out what to do." Clary lay down on the pile of furs he indicated, warm for the first time in hours, and fell into an exhausted sleep. She woke to the smell of cooking meat and the soft light of dawn filtering through the cave entrance. Eli was crouched by the fire, roasting what looked like rabbit on a spit. Her dress hung nearby, dry now, though probably permanently stained. "Morning," he said when he noticed her stirring. "How do you feel?" "Warm," she said, and the word felt like a luxury. "Alive." "Good. That's what we're aiming for." He offered her a portion of the meat. "Eat. Then we need to talk about your situation." As they ate, Clary found herself telling him everything about her parents' death, the boarding house, the constant torment from the other residents, Mrs. Henderson's willingness to look the other way as long as Clary did the bulk of the work. "I have nowhere else to go," she finished miserably. "No money, no family, no prospects. If I'm not at the boarding house, I'll be on the street." Eli was quiet for a long moment, his brow furrowed in thought. "What if you didn't go back?" "What do you mean?" "Stay here, learn to survive in the mountains." He held up a hand before she could protest. "I'm not proposing anything improper. There's another cave about 100 yards from here, smaller but defensible. I could help you set it up as your own place, teach you to hunt, trap, find edible plants, preserve food for winter. It's hard work, but no harder than what you were doing at that boarding house. And up here, no one will mock you or treat you like you're less than human." Clary stared at him, hope and disbelief warring in her chest. "You would do that? Teach me?" "I would, if you're willing to learn." "But why? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Eli looked at her steadily. "Because everyone deserves a chance to live with dignity. Because I was given the same chance when I came up here, and I believe in passing that forward. And because—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Because I've been alone up here for 4 years, and while the solitude has been healing, there's something to be said for human companionship. Not romantic," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "Just friendship. Someone to talk to occasionally, to share a meal with, to know that I'm not completely alone in the world." The honesty in his words touched something deep in Clary's heart. He wasn't offering charity out of pity or obligation. He was offering partnership, mutual benefit, respect. "I want to learn," she said firmly. "Teach me." And so began the strangest and most wonderful period of Clary's life. That first day, Eli showed her the second cave he'd mentioned, indeed smaller than his, but with a natural chimney for smoke and a clear spring nearby. Together they carried furs and supplies to outfit it as her dwelling. Over the following days and weeks, Eli proved to be a patient and thorough teacher. He showed her how to build and maintain a fire in all weather conditions, how to identify edible plants and roots, how to set snares for rabbits and other small game. He taught her to read weather signs in the sky and the behavior of animals, to find her way by the stars and landmarks. Clary discovered she had a natural aptitude for survival skills. Her hands, so often clumsy with nervousness in the boarding house, were steady and sure when working with traps and tools. Her size, which had been a source of shame in town, became an asset in the mountains. She was strong, able to carry heavy loads and work for hours without tiring. More importantly, she found herself changing inside. The constant anxiety that had characterized her existence in Pinecrest began to fade. She slept better, ate without guilt, moved without shame. Eli never commented on her appearance except to note approvingly when she learned a new skill or showed improvement in her abilities. They fell into a comfortable routine. Each morning they would check their respective trap lines, meeting afterward to share their catches and plan the day's work. Eli taught her to tan hides, to smoke meat for preservation, to fashion tools and weapons from bone and stone. In the evenings, they would often share a fire and conversation. It was during these conversations that Clary came to know Eli as more than just her teacher. He spoke of his childhood in Pinecrest, of dreams he'd once had of raising horses, of the pain of betrayal when his fiancée had abandoned him without a word of explanation or apology. "She never even spoke to me," he said one evening, his voice distant with memory. "One day we were planning our wedding, and the next, her father informed mine that the engagement was terminated. I tried to speak with her, but she wouldn't see me, wouldn't even send a message. It was like I'd ceased to exist." "That must have been awful," Clary said softly. "It was. But looking back now, I realize it was also a gift. That life would have been a lie, built on status and money rather than genuine connection. Up here, everything is real. The cold is real. The hunger is real. But so is the satisfaction of a successful hunt, the beauty of a mountain sunrise, the peace of falling asleep under the stars." Clary understood exactly what he meant. Her own life in town had been a constant performance, trying to be smaller, quieter, less offensive to those around her. Here in the mountains, she could simply be. As autumn deepened into early winter, Clary became proficient in mountain survival. She could track game through the forest, skin and butcher her catches, prepare pelts for trade. Eli showed her the route to a trading post a 3-day journey away, where they could exchange furs and herbs for supplies they couldn't make or find themselves. But with her growing competence came an unexpected complication. Feelings she hadn't anticipated and didn't quite know how to handle. She found herself watching Eli as he worked, admiring the strength in his hands, the kindness in his eyes, the patient way he explained things. She looked forward to their evening conversations with an eagerness that went beyond friendship. She told herself it was gratitude, nothing more. Eli had saved her life and given her a new one. Of course, she felt warmly toward him, but gratitude didn't explain the way her heart raced when their hands accidentally touched while working, or the disappointment she felt on the rare evenings when Eli seemed preoccupied and their conversations were brief. If Eli noticed any change in her demeanor, he gave no sign. He remained consistently friendly but proper, never crossing any boundaries that might make her uncomfortable. It was both reassuring and frustrating. Winter arrived with the first serious snowfall in late November. Clary woke one morning to find the world transformed, blanketed in white that glittered under the pale sun. She emerged from her cave to find Eli already up, checking that their food stores and firewood supplies were adequate for what promised to be a harsh season. "This is when mountain life gets serious," he told her. "We'll be snowed in for weeks at a time. The game will be scarce, and the cold will be brutal. Are you sure you want to stay? It's not too late to return to town." Clary looked at him steadily. "I'm sure. This is my home now." Something flickered in his eyes. Approval, perhaps, or something deeper. But he only nodded. "Then we'd better make sure you're prepared." The winter storms came with a vengeance. There were days when the snow fell so heavily that venturing outside meant disorientation and potential death. During these times, Clary stayed in her cave, working on projects Eli had taught her, mending clothes, crafting tools, preparing medicine from dried herbs. But there were also clear, crisp days when the mountains were so beautiful they took her breath away. On these days, she and Eli would work together, hunting or checking trap lines, and she felt more alive than she ever had in her previous life. It was during one of these expeditions that they encountered the first sign of trouble. They had ventured farther than usual, tracking a deer that Eli said would provide meat for weeks. As they moved through a narrow valley, Eli suddenly stopped, his hand raised in warning. "Tracks," he said quietly, pointing to the snow. "Boot prints, fresh, no more than an hour old." Clary's heart began to pound. "Hunters from town? Maybe. Or—" his expression grew grim. "Could be men looking for you." "Why would anyone look for me? They were happy to be rid of me." "Perhaps, but Mrs. Henderson lost her unpaid labor when you left, and people like Margaret need someone to feel superior to. Without you, they might have to confront their own inadequacies." They followed the tracks cautiously and discovered a disturbing sight. A camp had been set up in a sheltered area, and clear signs indicated the occupants had been surveying the area, looking for something or someone. "We need to be careful," Eli said. "If they find you, they might try to force you back. And I won't let that happen without a fight, which could mean trouble for both of us." They returned to their caves, and Eli began teaching Clary more defensive skills, how to move quietly through the forest, how to hide her tracks, how to recognize when she was being followed. He also, somewhat reluctantly, taught her to shoot. "I've never held a gun before," Clary said, hefting the rifle nervously. "Then it's time you learned. The mountains are beautiful, but they're also dangerous. You need to be able to protect yourself." His voice softened. "I won't always be there to help you." The thought of Eli not being there sent a pang through Clary's heart, but she focused on the lesson. To her surprise, she proved to be a decent shot. Not excellent, but adequate, which Eli assured her was all she needed. The tension of potential discovery hung over them for weeks. They saw more signs of the search party, tracks, abandoned campsites, even once a distant figure moving through the trees. Eli began staying closer to Clary's cave, ready to intervene if needed. Then came the night that changed everything. A massive storm rolled in without warning, the temperature dropping so rapidly that the rain that began falling froze on contact with the ground. Clary was in her cave when she heard Eli calling from outside. "Clary, Are you there?" She hurried to the entrance. "What's wrong?" "The storm. It's going to be bad. Worse than anything we've seen this year. Your cave's chimney isn't drawing properly. I noticed smoke backing up when I passed earlier. You need to come to my cave tonight. The fire's better there, and if this ice storm is as severe as I think, you'll need proper shelter." Clary grabbed her warmest furs and followed Eli through the now freezing rain. Ice was already forming on the trees, coating everything in a crystalline shell. By the time they reached Eli's cave, they were both soaked and shivering. Eli built up the fire while Clary stripped off her wet outer layers, wrapping herself in the dry furs he provided. But the cold had seeped deep into her bones, and she couldn't stop shaking. "Clary," Eli's voice was concerned, "are you all right?" "Cold," she managed through chattering teeth. "So cold." Without hesitation, Eli removed his own wet clothing and wrapped himself in furs, then moved to sit beside her. "The best way to prevent hypothermia is shared body heat. May I?" She nodded, and he put his arms around her, pulling her close against his chest. The warmth of his body was immediate and overwhelming. Clary pressed closer, seeking heat, and felt his arms tighten around her. "Better?" he asked softly. "Yes." Her shivering began to subside as his warmth penetrated the cold. Outside, she could hear the ice storm raging, but here in the cave, wrapped in Eli's arms, she felt safer than she ever had in her life. They sat like that for a long time, neither speaking, just sharing warmth and presence. Gradually, Clary became aware of other things: the steady beat of Eli's heart beneath her cheek, the strength in his arms, the way he absently stroked her hair as if the gesture were unconscious. "Eli," she said finally. "Hmm?" "Back in town, when they made me sleep in the rain, you said you were hunting nearby, but you stayed for hours, watching to make sure I was okay." "I did." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment, and she felt tension enter his body. "Because from the moment I saw you, something in me recognized something in you. I saw someone who was being broken by cruelty and indifference, and I couldn't walk away. I had to know you'd survive." Clary pulled back slightly to look up at him. His face was closer than she'd realized, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "And now? Why do you stay close now?" "Because—" He seemed to struggle with the words, his usual confidence deserting him. "Because you've become important to me, more important than I intended. I told myself I was just teaching you, helping you, being a friend. But the truth is, Clary, I care about you deeply, and not just as a friend." Her heart seemed to stop and then restart at double speed. "You care about me?" "I do. I know I shouldn't. I'm older than you, and I was meant to be your teacher, nothing more. But these months together, seeing your strength, your determination, your kindness, even after everything you've been through, I've fallen in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, monumental and terrifying and wonderful. Clary searched his face, looking for any sign of deception or pity, but found only honest emotion. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have for months now. I just didn't know if I was allowed to feel that way." "Allowed?" Eli's expression was pained. "Oh, Clary, you're allowed to feel anything you want. Your feelings are valid and valuable, just like you are." And then, with infinite gentleness, he leaned down and kissed her. It was nothing like the rough, forceful kisses Clary had sometimes witnessed in town, stolen in alleys and doorways. This was tender and sweet, a question as much as a declaration. She kissed him back, her hands finding their way to his face, feeling the rough stubble of his beard beneath her palms. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Eli rested his forehead against hers. "From this day forward," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I'll never let you be cold again, not in body, not in spirit. I promise you that." Clary felt tears spill down her cheeks, but these were tears of joy, of relief, of coming home. "I promise the same to you." They held each other as the storm raged outside, and Clary thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that terrible night in the rain to this moment of perfect warmth and love. She thought about the girl she'd been, broken and shamed, and the woman she'd become, strong and free. The storm lasted 3 days. During that time, Clary and Eli talked about everything, their pasts, their fears, their dreams for the future. They made plans for the spring, when they would build a proper cabin to share, larger and more comfortable than either of their caves. "We could still go into town occasionally," Eli suggested. "Trade our furs, buy supplies, let them see that you not only survived, but thrived." But Clary shook her head. "I don't need their validation anymore. I don't need them to see anything. I know who I am now, and that's enough." When the storm finally cleared, they emerged to find the world coated in ice, everything glittering like crystal in the winter sun. As they surveyed the landscape, Eli took Clary's hand. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Those men who were searching, they came to my cave 2 days before the storm. I was out checking traps, and they left a message carved into a tree nearby. They're coming back in the spring with more men. Mrs. Henderson is claiming you stole from her when you left. It's a lie, of course, but it gives them legal pretense to search for you." Clary felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "What do we do?" "We have options. We could go deeper into the mountains, beyond where they'd be willing to search. We could go to a different territory entirely, Oregon maybe, or California, or—" He paused. "We could face them." "Face them how?" "I know a federal marshal who passes through these parts occasionally. Good man, honest. If we could get to him before they come back, explain the situation, he might be able to help. Mrs. Henderson's claim is false, and any investigation would prove it. The problem is, by the time an investigation happened, they might have already tried to take you by force." Clary thought about this, weighing their options. Part of her wanted to run, to disappear so deep into the wilderness that no one would ever find them. But another part, the part that had grown strong and confident over these months in the mountains, rebelled at the idea of running from bullies. "I want to face them," she said finally, "not because I care what they think, but because I won't let them make me a fugitive. This is my home now. I won't be driven from it by lies." Eli smiled, pride evident in his expression. "Then we'll face them together." The winter passed in preparation. Eli taught Clary everything he knew about dealing with hostile situations, about reading people's intentions, about standing her ground without provoking unnecessary conflict. They also worked on building a case for her innocence, documenting her possessions, all of which had come from Eli or had been made by her own hands, to prove she'd taken nothing from the boarding house. Spring arrived with a rush of meltwater and new growth. The mountains came alive with color and sound, and Clary marveled at the transformation. She had survived her first mountain winter, and the achievement filled her with pride. They were working on the site for their new cabin when the confrontation finally came. Margaret led the search party, accompanied by Mrs. Henderson, the town constable, and 4 men Clary vaguely recognized from Pinecrest. They found Clary and Eli clearing timber, both dressed in practical mountain clothing and looking healthy and capable. "There she is!" Margaret cried, pointing dramatically. "The thief!" Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her face pinched with malice. "Clara Thompson, you are accused of stealing money and goods from my establishment. You will return to town to face charges." Clary stepped forward calmly, Eli at her side. "I stole nothing from you, Mrs. Henderson. I left with only the clothes I was wearing, the same clothes you had allowed to be ruined by forcing me to sleep in the rain." "Lies!" Margaret interjected. "You've been living up here like some kind of savage, probably stealing from trappers and traders." "Actually," a new voice interrupted, "she's been living here as my guest and student." A man emerged from the tree line, older, with a federal marshal's badge gleaming on his chest. Eli had found him the week before and explained the situation. "Marshal Brennan," the constable said nervously, "we weren't informed of federal involvement." "That's because this isn't a federal matter. It's barely a local matter." Brennan looked at Mrs. Henderson with cold eyes. "I've investigated the claims you made against Miss Thompson. Interesting that you could provide no detailed inventory of what was supposedly stolen, no witnesses who actually saw her take anything. Also interesting that several former residents of your boarding house, when interviewed, described a pattern of abuse and forced labor." Mrs. Henderson paled. "That's not—" "In fact," Brennan continued, "I'd say you're lucky Miss Thompson isn't pressing charges against you for negligent endangerment. Forcing someone to sleep outside during a storm could easily be construed as attempted murder." Margaret opened her mouth to protest, but the marshal's sharp gaze silenced her. "As for you, miss, I've heard some interesting stories about your behavior as well. Seems like there's a pattern of cruelty that multiple people have witnessed. Might want to think about that before you go throwing accusations around." The group from town stood in stunned silence. The constable, clearly eager to distance himself from a losing situation, tipped his hat. "Seems like there's been a misunderstanding. We'll be heading back to town now." As they turned to leave, Clary called out, "Mrs. Henderson?" The older woman turned back, her expression venomous. "I forgive you," Clary said simply. "Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry hatred in my heart. You can't hurt me any more. I'm free of you." The words hit harder than any accusation could have. Mrs. Henderson flinched and turned away, hurrying back toward town with her group trailing behind. When they were gone, Marshal Brennan approached Clary and Eli. "You two planning to stay up here?" "We are," Eli confirmed. "We're building a cabin, planning to trap and hunt, maybe trade some." "Good. Territory needs people like you, honest, hard-working, able to handle yourselves." He looked at Clary. "You've come a long way from that scared girl hiding in the rain. Be proud of that." After the marshal left, Clary and Eli stood together, watching the sun set over the mountains that had become their home. Eli put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth, a warmth that had become as essential to her as breath. "I used to think I was nothing," Clary said softly. "Less than nothing. Something to be ashamed of and hidden away. And now Now I know that I'm strong, I'm capable, I'm worthy of love and respect. The mountains taught me that. You taught me that. Eli turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. You taught yourself that. I just gave you the space to discover what was already there. You were always strong, Clary. You survived years of abuse and cruelty, and you never became cruel yourself. That takes more strength than anything I've ever done. She stood on tiptoe to kiss him, and he wrapped his arms around her, lifting her off her feet in a gesture of pure joy. Over the following months, they built their cabin, a solid structure with a large fireplace, windows that faced the sunrise, and a porch where they could sit on warm evenings. They married in a simple ceremony with only the mountains as witnesses, speaking vows of love and partnership under the vast Wyoming sky. Life in the mountains was hard work, but it was honest work, and it was theirs. They hunted and trapped, traded with passing trappers and the occasional Native American group that moved through the area. Clary became known among the mountain folk as a skilled herbalist, able to treat various ailments with preparations she made from local plants. Sometimes they would see people from Pinecrest at trading posts or settlements. The reactions varied. Some were hostile, others merely indifferent, and a few grudgingly respectful. Clary found she didn't care either way. Their opinions had no power over her anymore. One spring, nearly 2 years after that fateful night in the rain, a young woman approached Clary at a trading post. She was thin and nervous, with bruises on her wrists that she tried to hide. "You're Clara Thompson, aren't you?" she asked hesitantly. "The one who left the Henderson boarding house." "I am," Clary confirmed gently. "I'm there now. It's awful. Mrs. Henderson and the others, they're so cruel, but I have nowhere else to go. No skills, no money, nothing." Tears welled in her eyes. "How did you do it? How did you escape?" Clary looked at this girl, barely 18, terrified, trapped in the same hell she had once inhabited, and made a decision. "Come with us," she said. "My husband and we can teach you to survive in the mountains. It's not easy, but it's better than what you're enduring now. You deserve better." The girl's eyes widened with hope and fear. "You would do that? For a stranger?" "Someone did it for me once," Clary said, glancing at Eli, who nodded his approval. "I'm just passing it forward." And so their cabin became a refuge, not just for them, but for others who needed escape from the cruelty of so-called civilized society. They taught survival skills and self-reliance, but more importantly, they taught dignity and self-worth. Years passed. Their cabin was joined by others as more people chose the freedom of the mountains over the constraints of towns that judged and condemned anything different. A small community formed, built on principles of mutual respect and acceptance. Clary sometimes thought about that night in the rain, shivering under the woodshed overhang, certain she would die alone and unmourned. She thought about the moment Eli had appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to voice. He had promised she would never be cold again, and he had kept that promise in ways both literal and profound. He had given her warmth, yes, but also love, respect, purpose, and a place to belong. Together, they had built something beautiful from the ashes of her pain. On winter evenings, when snow fell soft and thick outside their cabin, Clary would sit by the fire with Eli, wrapped in his arms, and feel the deep contentment of someone who has found their true home, not in a place, but in another person's heart. The mountains stood eternal around them, silent witnesses to their love story. And in the warmth of their cabin, surrounded by the life they had built together, Clary knew with absolute certainty that she had found something the people of Pinecrest never would: true freedom, genuine happiness, and a love that asked nothing except that she be herself. She was cold no more, in body or in spirit, and she never would be again,